Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. So what I wanted to do today was go through a very simple watercolor little landscape, and for ease what I'm going to do is paint it from my phone. I know some people don't have access to printers, so I thought this would be another thing that you can do as well. So first thing, I just want to talk through the material. So I have a watercolor pan set here, and I'm going to be using two brushes. So I have a number 6 and a number 12, and usually a good way to know which ones to use are any areas that have got sort of a lot of color to fill. It's always good to start with your larger brushes, and these are round head brushes. And then as you go on to do smaller detailed work, you can obviously move through to smaller brushes. Now these are mixed media brushes, so they are good for watercolor, acrylic and gouache. I recommend starting with something like this, particularly when you're just practicing and doing something for the first time. Then once you get used to how the various different mediums work with brushes like this, then you can get specific brushes like watercolor brushes. So I've got a little bit of water and I've got a pencil here, because I'm going to very quickly go through a basic sketch for you. So something I would recommend is not to focus too much on detail. You just want to get some basic lines and shapes in. So obviously the first thing I'm going to do is put the moon in here very roughly. I'm not going to worry too much about being specific. I'm not going to worry about drawing all of the branches of the trees or anything like that. I'm literally just going to put in some basic lines just as a guide, so that when you start adding your paint, you know whereabouts you're going to be going. Alright, so that's all I'm going to do. I don't know how well the camera will pick this up, it's quite faint, but just to give you an idea on just how minimal those lines are. Something else I recommend, particularly as you go forward, is to use watercolor pencils to do your outline, because as you start adding your watercolor paint, the pencil marks will disappear. But in the meantime, if you're using an ordinary box standard pencil, just do it very lightly. Okay, so something I want to show you, I'm going to start with my larger of my two brushes here. I'm going to dip into the water a couple of times and get a little bit of paint, and I'm literally just going to start dropping in some colour. So I've got more water than paint on my brush at the moment. Just going to start moving this around and just dropping that paint in. Where I've got more water on the brush, this is very much sort of the wet in wet technique, which is where you would be having water on the surface of the paper that you're working on, and then you just add your paint. So I'm going to do a little bit of that now. Just drop in some colour, move it around a little bit, and then just from the edge here, I'm going to just start teasing out some of that paint. I'm going to add a little bit more. So this is a really good, simple, easy technique to do, particularly when you're starting out, because you don't have to worry about being specific, and you're literally just dropping that colour in. So as you can probably see, I've still got quite a lot of moisture on this brush. Dipped it into the paint once, dip it in, and then I'm going to wash some of that out of my brush, and then just using the water on the brush, I'm just going to move that around. I'm going to drop in another colour, a little bit of blue here, a little bit there. So this is something I recommend you do when you're starting out with watercolour, is start off with a little bit of a wet in wet technique, where you've got more of a sort of water surface to work from, and then you literally just start dropping your colours in. Alright, Right, I'm going to move to my smaller of my two brushes now, and I'm going to see if I can just zoom this in a little bit more. And then what I'm going to do is I've gone into my water once. I'm going to just add this water here, just to where the mountains are. A little bit more water, spot of paint. And I'm just going to drop that in. I'm going to add a little bit more water. And then I'm just going to use the brush just to move some of this paint around. Something else you can do also is when you're using any particular colour is have a look to see if that colour is anywhere else in your painting, so then you can use that colour. That's particularly helpful also if you've been mixing colours, because sometimes people find it a little bit tricky to continuously mix up the same colours again and again, because it can be a little bit difficult to get the quantities of all of your colours right. But if you're working just from a natural sort of tube or pan based colour like I am, where there's no mixing involved, you don't have to worry too much about that. I'm going to go into another blue here. I'm just going to add a little bit more. The good thing about watercolour, particularly when you're experimenting, is you can do so many things with it. You can use it sort of in the wet and wet technique like I'm doing here. You can do the wet and dry, which is where the surface of the paper is dry and you're just putting your paint in there. So I'm also just going to add a little bit of green here and there. Don't worry about getting colours absolutely specific when you're just starting out. It's all about experimentation. So if you can't see any green in there, doesn't mean you can't add it if you want to. Something else you can do is you can pull paint out like I'm doing now. That's something which is quite nice to do with watercolour, is to just get that sort of background in early on. So if I put a little bit there, let's do something a little bit unusual. Let's put something there. I think, oh, that's a little bit too dark. So what you do then, if you have that happen, is you can pull that paint and you can move it. You can lighten it by using water. Just going to just move and manipulate that paint a little bit. I'm going to do a little bit of grey in the bottom here. And you'll notice the way I'm painting with this is I'm sort of stippling my brush. I recommend this for watercolour because it does work very, very well. You get more of a subtle look. Again, I'm going to pull some of this from over here and move it over here. So if you do find you've put a colour in the wrong place or it's a little bit too intense, what you can do is just move that around. I also recommend that you have a look at the paint set you have, because there's a difference between watercolour and water soluble. So watercolour is what I'm working with here. It's watercolour paint, and what that means is if I left this for an hour or even a week, a few days, you can come back to it and reactivate it with water, and you can lift that paint up. You can do some layering with it. If you're working with water soluble paint, then as soon as the area has dried, it becomes permanent, so you can't reactivate it with water. So it's always worth knowing exactly what you're working with. Just going to put in some of these trees here, using a little bit of grey. So I'm letting some of the areas dry just a little bit. I still want a little bit of a bleed with the paint, because that's going to help me with these branches of these trees here. Still using this stippling motion. The good thing with this medium is because it has this very gentle, dreamlike almost state to it, you can create some impressionist style paintings where they don't have to be specific, you've just got the idea of something. So I've got a little bit of grey, it's just running out on the tip of my brush now, but there's just enough there that I can use it for very, very light shadows on these mountains. I'll work on this tree here a little bit, so I'm going to get a little bit of paint, just a bit, just like that, stippling that in. As I said, if you find you've got a colour and it's a bit too intense, just use water just to make it a little bit more subtle. You can pull paint out if you need to loosen it. As you can see, it's starting to come together now. What I'm going to do is wipe off the excess, something you might have seen some artists do as well. If you don't have any kitchen roll or tissue to hand, it's good to always test the moisture you have on your brush, because sometimes you can have too much water, too much or not enough paint. You go to put it on and it sort of just becomes literally a bit of a puddle and it starts to blur. So something that artists do is they go into the water and they'll test just how much is on there by having a look at their skin. So that's a good little tip, because sometimes when you are painting with watercolour, you want the colour to be a certain tone, you want it to be, and you want the paint to be a certain consistency. So you don't always want the brush to be wet, you want it to be damp. So the best way to actually know that is to feel it on your skin. So I tend to sort of use my hand as my tester rather than use a paper towel, because whilst that takes off excess water and paint, you can't actually feel how much is being removed from the brush. So on your skin, it gives you a little bit more indication. So you can see what I'm doing now is I'm just putting in a little bit of grey, very, very lightly. The paper is still damp, so I'm sort of using that to help me. And the areas that are drying a little bit, I can go back over those with thicker paint. So I've got more paint on my brush than water now. I'm just gonna build. You can see I'm not doing every single branch. I'm literally just doing a series of little dots and dashes to create the idea of these trees. So as I said, they're not specific. They're not detailed at all, they're just indications here and there. I'm going to do a little bit more of this grey just as it's running out on my brush. I'm just going to make it a little bit more intense. I'm going to add a bit more up here. I'll show you what I'm going to do with that in a moment. So you can see this is a really, really solid line I'm doing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in with a little bit of water. I'm just going to start teasing this out a bit. Just tease that out, a little bit more water. What that's going to do is that's going to emphasise the moon a little bit more. All that round, all that round. Alright, so just experiment with it. A little bit more here. I'm going to add a little bit more blue so that we have this indication of a little lake here. Some green in the background. And just keep building it up. That's the lovely thing with watercolour, is you can build and build and build. The trick to know is when you want your layers to still be a little bit damp so that you can work into them, pull paint out or add more layers, or if you want those layers to be completely dry so that you can build more solid tones on top. Okay, I'm going to do is I'm going to let this dry completely now, because I've got all of my basic tones in. I'm going to let this dry, and then I'm going to go in with some pencil and or some pen just to lift everything a little bit. Okay, so this is more or less dried now, so obviously you want it to not be damp to touch. If you're going to go in with pen, then I recommend biro rather than fine liners at this point. For something delicate like this, fine liners can bleed a little bit, which can be a little bit too intense for something subtle. So I'm going to use a pencil. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to zoom in on the area that I want to pay attention to, and I'm literally just going to start outlining and neatening any areas that I feel need a little bit more definition here and there. So I recommend just neatening up with pencil, as I said, because it's a little bit gentler, particularly for watercolour. Just going to do a little bit just around the outside here, just so that it sort of blends into some of the watercolour a little bit. And then I'm going to just do a little bit of detail on these mountains. What this is going to do is it's going to lift everything a little bit. I'm using a sort of scratchy motion. Again, I'm going to put some more detail into the trees. I might go in to the trees with a fine liner, because that might work okay, because they're that much darker than the rest of the image. But it's always good to start with something like pencil, because obviously if you feel that something's a little bit too dark or it's not quite right, you can rub it out. With pen, you don't have that option. So I'm just going to do a little bit more outlining here. Just put a few indications of these little trees. And just have fun with it. Put a little extra one in the background. Do a little bit more pencil work here. What I'm doing is I'm also just paying attention to how much pressure I'm putting on this pencil, so that we have some areas that are a little bit more intense and some that's a little bit gentler. So I'm going to just fade that out with a very, very light pressure with my pencil. And then I'm going to do very, very light just here, just to finish off that moon. I'm going to do, again, if I hold my pencil down here, this will adjust the pressure even more. I just want to put a little bit of an indication of something just behind these mountains here, just so that there's something between the moon and the landscape. So as I said, this sort of gives the impression rather than the overall, which I think works beautifully with a medium like watercolour, and is another reason why I think it's a very, very good medium to start with, because you can literally have this sort of watery, washy effect without having to worry about getting absolutely everything precise. Okay, so I'm going to go in with a little bit of pen, just got an ordinary biro, just for an indication. Just a few more details on some of these trees in the background here. Just a little bit, nothing too much. But it just lifts and brings everything up just a bit. So as you can see, I'm not doing loads, I'm just literally picking and choosing. I'm doing this very, very roughly. I'm going to do the tops of these mountains as well. There we go. Just a little bit around there, just to lift things a little bit. And then if I use this very, very gently, you can use pen, particularly biro, in a sketchy way, which is something I absolutely adore doing. I love using pen in artwork. So there we go. So I hope that you've found this mini watercolour tutorial helpful. Please do like and subscribe if you haven't already. I really do appreciate it. Check out my playlists. I've got all sorts on my channel, from other art demos to virtual exhibitions, and I do paper crafts as well, including bullet journaling, art journaling and junk journaling, so there's something for everybody. And I will see you soon for my next